The church is hushed, thick with grief. My sister leans across the pew, diamonds glittering, and whispers, "At the man, the fortune, the life. You got this." But I just smile and reply, "Chloe, meet my husband." Her face drains of color. "Tell me, what would you do if the very people who once broke you suddenly realized the truth? You'd already destroyed them?" Boston glittered like a promise the night Julian slipped the ring on my finger. We stood at the top of the Hancock Tower, champagne fizzing in crystal flutes. The city sprawled below us in a sea of lights. He kissed my hand, the diamond catching the glow of the skyline, and whispered, "This is just the beginning, Amelia. You and me will own the world." And for a time, I believed him. My life back then was sculpted perfection. Corner office overlooking Copley Square, tailored suits sharp enough to cut glass, and a fiancé whose name carried weight in every boardroom from Boston to Silicon Valley. Julian Thorne wasn't just successful. He was the kind of man who made success look effortless. A tech prodigy with the charm of a movie star, the sort of man people described as inevitable. At parties, people called us the golden couple. We didn't just walk into a room, we lit it. My sister Chloe was always there too, orbiting us like a smaller planet around a blazing sun. She'd joke about living in our shadow, toss her hair, and sip another glass of wine. But sometimes, just sometimes, I'd catch her watching Julian with a look I couldn't name. Admiration, envy, hunger. Julian never noticed. Or maybe he did, and I simply refused to see it. Our parents adored him. My father said Julian reminded him of himself as a young man. Ambitious, relentless, hungry. My mother fawned over how perfect we looked together, already planning the grand wedding in her head. Chloe, of course, teased me endlessly about being Mrs. Millionaire. But beneath the playful jabs, there was something sharper. I didn't pay attention then. I thought family bonds were unbreakable, immune to cracks. I thought love was enough protection against envy. I thought wrong. Because while I was busy building a future with Julian, Chloe wasn't just watching. She was waiting. It was raining that afternoon, the kind of rain that doesn't fall but hangs in the air like a damp veil. I remember the smell of wet leather as I slid into my car, Julian's favorite lunch balanced carefully on the seat beside me. He'd been working non-stop on a new project, so I thought a small gesture might cut through his exhaustion. That's who I was back then, the woman who kept the world spinning smoothly for everyone else. The elevator ride up to his office felt ordinary, the hum of fluorescent lights overhead, the faint buzz of my phone in my purse. Nothing about that day screamed disaster. If anything, it felt routine, almost comforting. Until I opened the door. Julian wasn't alone. At first, I thought it was a casual hug, some misplaced closeness in a moment of stress. But then I saw Chloe's hand, my sister's hand, sliding against the back of his neck, pulling him closer. Their kiss wasn't tentative. It wasn't new. It was practiced. Familiar. Time didn't stop. It shattered. The bag slipped from my fingers, containers spilling open, the smell of pesto and roasted tomatoes staining the air. Julian jerked back like a schoolboy caught cheating on a test, stammering something, my name, maybe an apology. His lips still glistened with her betrayal. But Chloe didn't flinch. She smoothed the skirt of her dress, lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. Triumph. That's what it was. Victory, laid bare on her face. "Some things are just meant to be, Amelia," she said, her voice steady, dismissive. "You'll understand one day." Her words cut sharper than his silence. I didn't scream. I didn't collapse. Something colder than grief took over, something that hollowed me out from the inside. My hand moved on its own, slipping the diamond from my finger. I placed it carefully on Julian's desk, between the half-eaten sandwiches and the shards of my dignity, and then I walked out. No one followed me. Not Julian. Not Chloe. The rain hit harder as I stepped outside, soaking through silk and skin until I couldn't tell the difference between water and tears. My world wasn't just fractured. It was obliterated. The days after felt like wandering through smoke. People spoke to me, co-workers, my parents, even strangers. But their words reached me as though through water, muffled and meaningless. Boston, once alive with possibility, felt like a cage I couldn't breathe in. My parents knew something was wrong. They always did. So when Chloe and Julian showed up at the family house one evening, arm in arm like nothing had happened, the truth cracked open. We were sitting at the long mahogany dining table, the one polished to a mirror sheen every Sunday growing up. My mother was fussing with silverware, trying to keep the peace, while my father watched with that narrowed gaze that always meant trouble was brewing. Julian cleared his throat first, his voice sticky with false remorse. "Amelia, we never meant for this to happen. Feelings change." I stared at him, my fork untouched on the plate. My sister sat closer to him than necessary, their knees brushing under the table. "Feelings change?" I repeated, my voice flat. "You were engaged to me, Julian. You were sleeping with her while promising me forever." The silence was heavy. My mother pressed her napkin to her lips, her eyes darting between us like a spectator at a match she didn't want to watch. "But Chloe..." Chloe leaned forward, her hand sliding onto Julian's with the kind of casual confidence that turned my stomach. Her tone was sugar dipped in venom. "Amelia, stop pretending you don't see it. Julian and I were meant to be. You were just the wrong puzzle piece, and maybe it's better this way. You'll find someone more suited to you." More suited, as if love was a business transaction and I was a failed investment. I waited for my parents to speak up, to take my side, to call Chloe out for what she'd done. But my father only sighed, muttering something about life being complicated. My mother dabbed her eyes but said nothing. And that was the moment it hit me. I wasn't just losing Julian. I was losing my sister. My family. My place at this very table. The betrayal wasn't just an affair, it was exile. I stood, the chair scraping back against polished hardwood. My pulse pounded in my ears, but my voice came out calm, almost eerily so. "You can have each other," I said. "But you'll never have me again." That night, I packed everything I could into 2 suitcases. By morning, I was on a plane to Chicago. No note, no goodbye. Just silence, my only weapon left. The city swallowed me whole, and for the first time in my life I welcomed the feeling of being invisible. But as the skyline of Boston disappeared beneath the clouds, I made myself a promise. If our paths ever crossed again, I would not be the victim. I would be the reckoning. Chicago didn't welcome me. It swallowed me. The city was steel and glass, colder than Boston, faster, harsher. At first I thought running away would numb the pain. It didn't. It magnified it. Every honking cab, every faceless crowd reminded me how small I'd become. The first nights were the hardest. My apartment was a 1-bedroom box overlooking an alley that smelled of garbage and rain. I'd lie awake, staring at the cracked ceiling, replaying that dining table conversation on loop. Chloe's smug smile, Julian's hollow excuses, my father's silence. Some nights, I'd grip the edge of the mattress so hard my knuckles went white, as if I could hold myself together by force. Other nights I drowned in cheap wine, the kind that burned going down but numbed me enough to sleep. But grief, when fed long enough, transforms. It calcifies. I threw myself into work, clawing my way up in a firm that didn't care who I was or who I'd lost. Deadlines became my new religion. Spreadsheets, contracts, endless late-night coffee runs. They were the scaffolding holding me up. I wore my exhaustion like armor. There were whispers, of course. Co-workers wondered why I never spoke about my family, why I wore no ring. I gave them nothing. The past was a locked vault. And yet, there was a fire in me now. Every rejection, every betrayal, every sleepless night was fuel. If Chloe had stolen my life, then I would build a new one out of spite, one she couldn't touch, couldn't poison. Still, I wasn't free. Not really. I kept tabs on them, against my better judgment. Quiet searches late at night, Julian Thorne net worth, Chloe Thorne gala photos, engagement announcement. Every smiling picture was a blade twisting deeper. They looked untouchable, successful, smug. I'd trace Chloe's face on the screen, her designer gowns, her diamond rings, and I'd whisper to myself, someday. But fate has a twisted sense of timing, because while I was busy sharpening myself against the whetstone of rage, I crossed paths with a man who would change everything. Not because he swooped in to rescue me. No, I didn't need saving. But because his presence was a mirror, steady, unshakable, and dangerous in ways I couldn't yet understand. His name was Elias. And though I didn't know it at the time, Elias was already carrying the key to my revenge in his hands. I met Elias in the least cinematic way possible, over a stack of contracts at 2 a.m. The office was nearly deserted, humming with the sterile glow of fluorescent lights. My eyes burned from staring at spreadsheets, my fingers stiff from typing. He appeared in the doorway, tall, impeccably dressed, carrying the faint smell of cedar and ink. Not flashy like Julian, not magnetic in that dangerous way, but composed, measured, a presence that filled the room without demanding it. "You've been at this all night," he said, his voice calm, low. "You'll ruin your eyes." I almost laughed. After what I'd been through, the health of my eyes seemed irrelevant. Still, I noticed his gaze. Sharp, assessing, like he saw more than I was willing to show. Elias wasn't my boss, but he wasn't just another colleague either. He was part of the investment firm that oversaw half of Chicago's rising companies. His opinion carried weight. When he sat down across from me, rolling up his sleeves, I expected condescension. Instead, he worked beside me in silence, like we were equals. That night became the first of many. Over months, our conversations grew, not about families or heartbreak, but about ambition, strategy, the games people play in boardrooms. I found myself leaning on his steadiness, even when I didn't want to admit it. He never pried, never asked about Boston. He just gave me space, and in that space, I rebuilt myself. It wasn't love at first sight, it was respect, then curiosity, then something deeper, something quieter. One evening, over dinner, he asked, almost casually, "Why do you work so hard, Amelia?" I hesitated. How could I explain that every late night, every overachieved project, was a war against Chloe's triumphant smile? That I wasn't just climbing a ladder. I was proving I could exist without the man she stole, the life she flaunted? So I just said, "Because I can't afford not to." His eyes lingered on me, not with pity, but with recognition. Elias knew something about battles fought in silence, and then, slowly, the world shifted. We started sharing more than work, quiet dinners, long walks, his hand brushing mine in moments that felt uncalculated, real. When he kissed me for the first time, it wasn't fireworks. It was grounding, steady, like finding solid earth after years of drowning. But fate wasn't finished with me. Because as our relationship deepened, I began to see glimpses of the world Elias navigated. Names, companies, whispered stories of deals made and broken. And one evening, over a glass of wine, he mentioned a name I hadn't spoken aloud in years. Julian Thorne. Elias was reviewing a company called Vortex Dynamics. The name hit me like ice water. Julian's company, his empire. I said nothing, my fingers tightening around the stem of my glass until I thought it might crack. Elias went on, his tone analytical, detached. "The leadership is unstable, flashy but poor fundamentals. I'm not convinced they'll last another year." He didn't know. He didn't realize he'd just set a match to the gasoline I'd been storing in my veins for 6 long years. And in that moment, I knew. Fate had delivered me the perfect weapon. When Elias spoke about Vortex Dynamics again, it was weeks later, late at night in his study. The room smelled of old books and oak, the fire throwing restless shadows against the walls. I sat curled on the leather armchair, a glass of wine untouched in my hand, pretending I wasn't hanging on every word. Julian's name wasn't music anymore. It was poison. But hearing it fall from Elias's lips, it thrilled me. He leaned back, scanning a folder of numbers, his expression calm but resolute. "We're advising our partners to pull funding. The company's reckless. Too much show, not enough structure. It won't last." I kept my face composed, though inside, something dark uncoiled. Fate was writing a revenge I hadn't even planned. I didn't tell Elias who Julian was to me. I didn't need to. His decision wasn't mine, and that was the beauty of it. This wasn't vengeance I had to soil my hands with. It was justice, cold and clinical, dressed up as business strategy. But I did make a choice, a small one, a deliberate one. When Elias asked for my opinion on whether his instincts were right, I could have stayed neutral. I could have shrugged, played the detached professional. Instead, I leaned forward, the firelight catching the steel in my eyes. "You're right," I said softly. "The leadership's rotten. Better to cut losses now than let them drag everyone else down." It was a simple statement, nothing more than a second opinion. But it felt like the first stone cast. Within months, Vortex Dynamics imploded. Deals evaporated. Partners abandoned ship. And Julian Thorne, the man who once stood untouchable, fell hard. I never gloated, never sent a message, never even let my parents know I'd heard. But I savored the knowledge in silence. He was crumbling, and Chloe, clinging to his side, would crumble with him. I thought that was the end of it, that I could tuck the past away, satisfied. But fate wasn't finished. Fate was saving its sharpest blade for the moment our worlds collided again, 6 years later, in a church that smelled of damp wool and grief. And that's when the reckoning truly began. The church smelled of damp wool and fading lilies. Rain tapped against stained glass, a steady, mournful rhythm. My father's funeral had already been a long blur of condolences and hushed whispers when the air shifted, the way it always does when Chloe enters a room. She swept in late, draped in a black designer dress that clung like armor, diamonds winking at her ears, and beside her like a ghost resurrected was Julian. Older now, his once boyish charm weathered by years of disappointment, but still clinging to that arrogant posture as though nothing had changed. The pew across from me creaked under their weight. I felt Chloe's eyes on me before I even looked up. When I finally met her gaze, she smirked. Small, pitying, cutting. Then, leaning across the aisle, she whispered just loud enough for me to hear. "Poor Amelia. Still all alone, I see. Some things never change. I got the man, the fortune, the life. And you got this." Her hand gestured vaguely to the somber church, to the coffin, to grief. I didn't flinch. Instead, I smiled, slow and deliberate, a smile that didn't touch my eyes. And then I said the words I had been unknowingly waiting 6 years to deliver. "Chloe," I murmured, my voice steady. "I don't believe you've met my husband." Elias turned, calm as ever, his presence heavier than the rain outside. He extended his hand first to Julian, his tone polite, almost warm. "Julian," he said smoothly, "it's been a long time." Julian blinked, confusion flickering in his eyes. His bravado cracked as he searched Elias's face, failing to place it. Forgive me. Have we met?" Elias's voice remained even, conversational. "A few video calls, during the Vortex Dynamics evaluation. My firm was advising investors to withdraw. I was the one who deemed the leadership unstable." The words landed like stones in still water, rippling outward. I watched Julian's face drain of color, his jaw slacken. The collapse was instant. He remembered. He knew. The ruin of his empire. The quiet humiliation. The financial bleeding. It had been this man. My husband. Chloe's smile faltered, her painted confidence shattering as she glanced between us. For the first time in her life, her expression wasn't triumphant. It was afraid. And I sat there, silent, savoring it. The whispers spread through the church like wildfire, cousins and family friends leaning in, piecing together what had just unfolded. Julian's hand twitched, as though he wanted to speak, to defend himself, but nothing came. His silence was the final proof. Elias, ever the gentleman, ended it with grace. He turned to Chloe, offering his hand. "My condolences," he said softly, his tone sincere. She shook it, her own fingers limp, bejeweled, trembling. Then Elias guided me forward, his palm steady on the small of my back, his presence a shield as we walked away. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The collapse was complete. Their empire of betrayal had crumbled in public, and all I'd had to do was survive long enough to watch it fall. The funeral ended the way all funerals do, people drifting out in clusters, coats pulled tight, murmuring about weather, about traffic, about anything but the coffin they had just walked past. I stayed behind, standing in the stillness of the church, the air heavy with candle smoke and loss. My father lay in the ground now, silent, beyond judgment. I wondered if he'd have approved of what I'd done, if exposing Chloe and Julian that way was justice or simply vengeance dressed in black. A younger me would have cared deeply about the answer. But that version of me was long gone. Elias's hand found mine, steady and warm. For years I had carried the fracture inside me like a blade, sharp and hidden, always reminding me of what I'd lost. But in that church, watching Chloe's face pale and Julian's arrogance collapse into silence, something shifted. The blade dulled. Not because the past was erased, it never could be. But because I finally understood, survival itself had been my revenge. Every breath I took after their betrayal, every success I carved for myself, every step forward without them. That had been the punishment they never anticipated. Did it cost me? Yes. The years of silence, the nights awake replaying that office kiss, the hollow ache in holidays spent alone before Elias came into my life. Those scars remain. But scars are not just reminders of pain. They are proof of healing. As we walked out into the rain, I let it wash over me without flinching. For the first time, it didn't feel like grief soaking through my clothes. It felt like cleansing. Chloe and Julian were ghosts now, trapped in the ruins of their own making. I had no more need to haunt myself with them. I looked up at the gray sky, at the streaks of light fighting through the storm clouds, and whispered a truth I finally believed. I won. And this time, it wasn't triumph. It was peace.